Welcome to my video, A Course on Spindle Turning, or all you ever wanted to know about turning between centres but were afraid to ask. Most people when they take up a hobby are blessed with a dangerous cocktail of ignorance and enthusiasm. With this video we hope to educate the first and channel the second. And the first thing we have to do is introduce you to our tools and accessories. The accessories that we're going to use are a pair of calipers, a rule, a pencil and a hammer. The tools, which are three: an inch spindle gouge that I use for roughing out, and as you can see it's painted a strange colour, black and white, and this is to show all the movement of the tools as we use them. A standard straightforward spindle gouge, 1/2 inch in size, and my favourite, and during the course of this demonstration we will show you that this is the most forgiving skew chisel that you will ever use. It's a 3/8. What we're going to do now is a roughing out and caliper exercise, and the first thing we have to do before we actually start to turn is mount the timber into the lathe. Now the lathe we're using is an Axminster 950 with the manual variable speed, which means it's vitally important that you slow the lathe down before you mount your blank into the lathe. Now to do this, we've crossed the ends, and on this one I put 2 shortcuts from corner to corner to allow the drive to locate into the timber. At this end with the tailstock, I always allow the tailstock to be wound out. Don't shove it tight up against the wood, because then you've got to release the tailstock every time you want to remove the timber from the lathe. Wind that in, make sure that they're in the slots, and tighten up. Lock, and we have to set our rest a 1/16 of an inch or a couple of millis below center. It never moves from that place. We leave it there all the time we're doing spindle turning, and as close to it, to our blank as we possibly can get it, spinning the lathe to make sure that the wood is clear. And once we've done that, we're ready to start. And what we're going to use is the inch spindle gouge to rough out. Now I hold the spindle gouge in the center. I do not hold the handle and then finish up as far away from the wood as I possibly can get. I actually stand very close to the lathe, and by holding the gouge in the middle, it means that the handle goes against the side of my body and underneath my forearm. This hand, which is not a white knuckle job, just rests on the top of the gouge and allows me to move easily from side to side, like that. And now we're ready to start. Now the thing is that we are now concentrating, because what we don't want to do is something like that. We have to be concentrating from the minute we switch the lathe on. Now we bring the speed up, and we're going to use this on maximum speed. As long as the lathe is behaving itself, that's the speed that we use. And a nice, easy, simple movement from side to side. Nothing fancy. Don't try to be clever with the gouge and flick it off the end. Just a nice, simple movement from side to side. As at the moment you can see the shavings flying all over the place. That's because I've actually dropped my hand slightly back from the cutting edge. Once you've seen me rough out this way, I'll move my hand in a little bit closer, and the shavings then will all be deflected down onto the floor. Check out along the top of the piece of wood to see when it's round. As soon as it's round, stop. We don't want to put a load of wood on the floor that isn't necessary. And there we've roughed out our piece of wood. The next piece of wood we're going to rough out is one with a square on it. And I'll show you how to do that. We've remounted a new piece of wood, and as you can see, I've left a pencil mark there. That's the square that I'm going to leave, and this now is the square that I'm going to rough out. And for this, to start off with, we use our 1/2-inch spindle gouge. The important thing that you've got to realise is that once the lathe is on, the piece of wood is actually still round. Although it's square, you act as though it was perfectly round. It's the lathe on. Notice right away that the first entry cut is a long way away from the pencil line. And I roll the gouge into the wood, and I'm beginning slowly to open up a gap between the squares that I want and the squares that are going to become round. But all the movement of the gouge is to roll the gouge in. Gradually moving back till we reach the pencil line. Now my pencil line is at the beginning of where the wood becomes round. So that means that I go beyond the pencil line for rounding the shoulders off, and my gouge finishes up on the pencil line and is twisted out. Feel there to check whether it's round. Again, as soon as it's round, we stop. And get our roughing gouge and continue roughing out. And what you'll see now is my hand is now much closer to the wood, and all the shavings are going down the flute of the gouge and onto the floor. Don't worry about that, that's not a problem. All it means is the drive has come a little bit loose, so we tighten make sure that everything is tightened up. And away we go again. What you saw there is the drive, is the piece of wood spinning on the drive. Not a problem, not likely to come out. And by opening the gap up from the square we want to keep, there is no danger of damaging those squares when we complete the roughing out. Piece of wood nice and round, and we've completed the roughing out of that piece. And now we'll move on to a piece of wood with squares at both ends. Now we're going to rough out the centre part. Again, the first gouge that we use is the 1/2-inch spindle gouge. Well away from the squares again. Roll the gouge in. Again, opening up a gap. Now when we get close to the pencil line, I'm going to change the corners. On the first one we did a simple rounded corner. Get it down to the round first. That's okay. And now we're going to actually operate an OG corner. So we go beyond the pencil line, enter the wood and twist the gouge and then roll it. Now the important thing you can see now is the reason why we painted the gouges black and white, because that will give you, from the overhead camera, a good idea of how much the gouge twists and how much it rolls. Twist in action, roll in action. And again, twist in action, roll in action. At this end, we'll change the corner. We'll do a square corner. Again, opening it up and leaving a gap between the squares that we want and the squares that are going to become round. Up to the pencil line. Now this corner is the most difficult actually of all to do, because you've actually got to use our skew chisel. The long point is what we're going to use. You can see the angle of the skew chisel well over in this direction. Place the long point onto the wood and lifting the handle, move the chisel in. Now the angle is over in this direction because we've got a bevel and we need to cut straight in, not allowing the bevel to push you off the wood. And the reason I say it's the most difficult is because at point of entry on those squares, it is very dangerous and can very easily skid off and destroy the squares that you're trying to keep. Having done that, we can now go back with our roughing gouge and take away the middle. And straighten up that little tiny bit where we've undercut on the square. And there we've completed our 3 different types of roughing out. And the next part of what we're going to do is a caliper exercise. We've reverted to our original piece of timber. And we're now going to move the rest in as close as possible. If you're doing multiples, then rough them all out first and then move your rest in close. Now for our caliper exercise, we have one important thing to remember. The caliper is no good if it's there. You have to make sure that it's in your hand all the time. And what I do is take the caliper like that, then put the gouge in my hand like that. And that means it feels a little awkward, but don't worry about that. It's a reminder that you've got the calipers in your hand and you need to use them. Now remember when you're using calipers that every one cut you make on a round piece of wood is 2. So don't take too much off to start with. And as you can see, I'm using the caliper nearer to the back. Don't use it like this because the rest will stop it going over. Now this size, a little tiny clicking noise. Don't worry, we are all prone to taking a little bit more off one end than the other. But what we have to do is do a feather cut. Bring the gouge along and not remove the gouge directly from the timber, but feather it out. Now you see, we're getting further along at the right size. So we come back again and start again. and feather the cutout. Start again. Now it's getting a little bit, it's still tight there. Don't force the caliper over the wood. And don't let the caliper go over there, move it along and try to pull it out somewhere else. Wherever it goes over, it's removed from that place. And fade away. There we have that little tiny clicking noise. Means we've got our, well, a little bit tight there. See that fade on and fade off. And there we've completed our caliper exercise, and the timber is the size we want. Now we come to everybody's favourite tool, the skew chisel. And as you can see, mine is slightly different. It's a 3/8 skew chisel. And I'm going to show you in this demonstration that this is the most forgiving skew chisel you could ever wish to use. And the first thing we have to do is explain the principle of the skew chisel. First of all, you must ride the rest on that corner, or if it's going in the other direction, that corner. This is absolute gospel. There is no other way to use the chisel correctly. We also find that we have to only use the bottom third. So they tell us, I'm going to prove with this one that you can actually skew with the full width and nothing will happen. So let's get our position to start, and let's get rid of another thing that everybody bothers about. It's the bevel. Because everybody tells you to rub the bevel, you're thinking more about that than actually using the skew chisel. Well, let me tell you something. If you put an angle on your chisel, you don't get an option about rubbing the bevel. You can't do anything else. The only way I can not rub the bevel with this chisel is to put it like that, where I'm scraping. The minute I put any angle onto the chisel, I am rubbing the bevel. And that applies to most of the tools that we use. So this is our position to start. Either hand under or hand on the top. With this it doesn't really matter. And there is our shaving without the lathe moving. There's the shaving we're going to take off. Angle down slightly to the rear, handle slightly to the rear of the cutting edge, and it is only slightly, and away we go. Now most of you will believe that the way to use the skew chisel is totally in one direction. Well, I always finish with the skew chisel going in that direction. But if I have to make another cut, I don't mind going the other way. But we finish the cut off. Like that. Now I said it was the most forgiving skew chisel, and I said that you could use the full width of it. Well, here we go. That shows you just how much of the skew chisel I'm using. I'm digging the long point in, and under no circumstances can you do this with a wide skew chisel. It's not a magic tool. All as it means is that you don't have to worry about the bottom third. And if you make the same mistake going in the other direction, well, nothing happens there either. Now, of course, I know you don't want to skew like that, but that just proves how much control there is you can exercise over this skew chisel. Of course, I'm skewing with kiln dried timber, and you do get a slightly different shaving. If the wood is wet. Nothing changes. Now, you can't use wet timber very much for spindle work because it usually cracks. But there's nothing like using wet timber to gain confidence with the skew chisel. Oops, put the little point, the short point in there. And of course, finally, for those people who believe that you can only skew a small piece of wood with a 3/8 skew chisel, and now putting a 4-inch diameter piece in. And show you that it will make absolutely no difference to the skew chisel at all. The size of the piece of wood has no reference to the size of the skew chisel that we're going to use. The other thing you see that I don't do, I don't put the rest on the top. I leave it in exactly the same position all the time. And if you're worried that perhaps it will do that on a bigger piece of wood, well, there you go. So as you can see by this demonstration, the skew chisel is not the lethal weapon that everybody thinks it is, provided you buy the right skew chisel. Of course, the skew chisel isn't only for cleaning a piece of wood up. One of the jobs is to roll beads. And that will be the next exercise that we'll come to. As an instructor, one of the most difficult things to teach anybody is to roll beads. And that's what we're going to do now. Now, when you ask a student, because he's having difficulty, to practice, inevitably he does something like this. Which is fine, except that that bead came out that wide and that one came out that wide. He didn't know that was going to happen. It just happened. And unfortunately with spindle turning, that's the way people see it. We start there, finish there, whatever comes out in between, that's what happens. Well, no, it doesn't. And to actually practice properly, And there you hear something that is regarded as a dirty word as far as woodturning is concerned, the word practice. We don't ever practice. We go down to the workshop in 2 hours, come hell or high water, we come in with something. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as we've made something. And we've actually learned nothing. So, to practice, we need to pattern our piece of wood out first. Now, it doesn't matter now whether that bead is wider than that one or that cove is wider than that one, because we've already decided that's what it's going to be. Now we're practicing with discipline. And the first thing we have to do is form what I call a battlement shape. Now we're going to use these tools as shaping implements, and there's where my grip now on the gouge, on the chisel, changes. And it concerns the index finger. And I have to be honest, if you take no notice of anything else I say on this video, this I regard as the most important piece of advice I can give you. The index finger goes underneath the rest. Now, one of the problems with that is, of course, the first time you do it, you touch the wood, you jump, and you don't do it again. You can run your finger along that piece of wood all day long. It's not going to do you any harm because the wood is actually going away from you. So you don't have to worry about that. One little problem that I've got there on the end, which I'll solve straight away, is the fact that I've got a little cut mark that I should have taken away. So we'll take it away now and increase the size of the bead to there. That's fine, doesn't matter. That's okay now. So now we're going to start to form what I said before is the battlement shape. And the grip we use, as I said, is index finger underneath the rest, 3 fingers round the blade, thumb on the side. And that is the grip that we use when turning in close proximity, not when we're running the chisel along the rest. So only there when it's in close proximity, that's the grip. Make a note, 3 fingers round the blade, that isn't round the blade. Thumb on the corner. Now we're first of all going to use the long point. Unfortunately with the skew chisel, there are many different ways of using it. You have to remember which one that we're using it for. So the first one we're going to use is the long point. Because we've got a bevel, we have to put the handle of the chisel over there. What we want to do is cut in a straight shoulder. Never attack a pencil line right away. Push the chisel up towards the wood and lift. And lift. And lift. And we've cut in a straight shoulder. Now we move slightly over here. And again. And then here. And by going all the way down the line doing this, we are practicing cutting in, making this straight shoulder. If you find that the piece in the middle gets in your row, then just move the rest slightly and then we can carry on. And again, go a little bit faster now as we improve. See that lifting movement? Don't try to force the chisel into the wood like that, because as you can see, all as we get is clouds of smoke. Let the chisel lift and let the point cut into the wood. And on that side. Now what we can do is remove all the waste wood in the middle. And here we're not using the skew chisel as a skew chisel, but purely as a parting off tool. to get rid of waste wood. And one of the things that I like to show people while I'm doing this is about the control of the skew chisel. You can see that I'm using the skew chisel perfectly flat. But watch me lift the skew chisel up. Lift it up. From the flat to the cutting position. That's how much control you can exercise over this skew chisel. Also note, now the black and white of the tools will be effective, because we will see in a few minutes when we start to roll beads, the action. It will show it much more clearly. At the moment we've got the chisel flat and all as you can see is the black. And there we've completed our battlement shape. And in every wood turning shape there is a battlement shape to be found. And we'll explain a little bit more later on when we're doing a collection of shapes. So there we've completed our battlement shape, all ready to roll some beads. Now what we need to do before we start to roll beads is put a pencil line in the middle. Now by putting a pencil mark on the centre of a convex shape and working from either side of the pencil line, we get a continuous curve. We're now going to use the skew chisel in the third operation, which is now to use the short point of the skew chisel. And that's vitally important, the fact that we only use the short point. None of the cutting edge must make contact with the wood. To get into our position, you notice the finger underneath the rest again. This vitally important. Angle the chisel in the direction that you're going to roll. Short point facing the direction. Chisel kicked up off the rest. Move the chisel forward until the point makes contact with the wood and roll. Closer to the pencil line and roll. Almost on the pencil line and we roll all the way round. Change our position slightly. Hand position doesn't change, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a second. Point of the chisel on. Importantly, the chisel has now come off the wood. I do not stop the roll until it hits the wood there. That's exactly where I want it to hit the wood. I move the chisel closer to the pencil line, roll off the wood, keep rolling till it hits there. On the pencil line, and we roll the chisel all the way round. And what we've turned is a bead exactly the diameter that we wanted and exactly the width that we wanted. We'll do that again, and now from the overhead camera you'll realize that the black and white is showing you just how much the chisel rolls over. It has to finish like that. So that's the position that you take up with the handle. Twist your wrist back. If you roll from awkward to comfortable, then you will roll the chisel over. If you start off in a comfortable position and can't roll, you'll roll your body. So the idea is to start off with the chisel in the finished position, take hold of the handle, twist your wrist back, and that's the position to roll a bead. Point of the chisel on the edge of the wood, roll. It comes off the wood. Do not stop the roll. And the second time, roll. And the third, all the way round. Change my position, but not my hand grip, because the chisel will roll equally well in the opposite direction from the same position. Close to the pencil line. And all the way round. And if you're not happy with it, there's nothing to stop you doing an extra roll. And the third time, see the fingers wrap round the blade, point of the chisel on, roll off the wood. See the way the handle movement. And the last time, all the way round. Now what happens if you don't put the point of the chisel on and you try to use the cutting edge? Well, first of all, you'll finish up with this type of shape, because you won't be able to make the chisel roll over. It will just slide down the wood. And we finish up with a pyramid. Now if you finish up with a pyramid, you're very lucky, because in actual fact what you should finish up with is this. It's not very easy to do it intentionally. It's a lot easier to do it by accident. And what we finish up with is something commonly called a mess. And the reason for this is, of course, that wood has end grain. Not just there and there, but everywhere we cut in. And only the point of the chisel will cut end grain. Now, of course, another one of the shapes that is sometimes done is something I call a flat top. We don't go anywhere near the pencil line. Just roll the chisel over and finish off like that. It's all right, we can go and get some sandpaper and round it over. Well, no, we can't. We sand the shape we turn. We do not sand it into shape. So there we've completed our row of beads. First three done correctly, and then the problems with the last three. And now we'll go on to turning coves. And for this, we're going to use the 1/2-inch spindle gouge. The first one I'll do without saying too much, and then I'll go into detail of how the chisel is actually operating. From the overhead camera, you'll see how much movement, twisting action, that the gouge is making. If we take away all the shavings, if we can, you'll see going from white being shown to full black. And there's our cove. But how did we actually perform that action to make that shape? Well, you can see we've got the chisel the gouge pretty straight. First cut, in and get out. Why? Because we have no space. So we don't want to foul the other side. So we make the opening and then remove the chisel quickly. And now we're going to work from either side of that opening. And the gouge enters the wood and twists to the middle. From the other side, it enters the wood and twists to the middle. From the moment it leaves that corner, it is on a twist action. And the twist action only finishes when it reaches the center of the cove. Now we're starting to use some body movement. Move away the shavings. See the way I'm moving my body over this way, pushing the handle. All the time still making the twisting action. It's only gentle body movement, and if I took my body away altogether from the handle, that's the movement it makes. But the body helps to steady the gouge. Anything you can use to steady the gouge, any part of your body, so much the better. And that puts what I call side on the cove. As most people don't actually do this. What they do is stand directly in front. We'll make the shape, we'll open up the shape first, and then now watch the action of the gouge when I form this shape, which is what most people think looks like a cove. See, the gouge is only sliding all the way down the side till it reaches the bottom and then gives a twist. Sliding all the way down the side, twist. There is no body movement and there is no twisting action all the way down. And what we finish up forming is a Diablo. That's what it looks like. Looks like a Diablo. The sides of the cove run straight to the middle instead of coming round. Now we'll do the cotton reel. Because we've opened the cove up, the twist is finished. Too early. What happens? The chisel goes straight across the bottom. And we've got a flat bottom. Now you can see why I call it a cotton reel. So we'll go through the correct action again. Open it up. Then work from either side. The gouge twisting all the way to the center of the cove. As the cove gets wider, so the body starts to help. Note the finger underneath the rest again. I never change the grip on either of the shaping tools. See the body movement, the twisting of the gouge. These are all important things that we do to form good shapes. And there's our cove. Now what I'm going to do before we finish off is just straighten up the fillets These little flat areas here are called fillets. They divide the cove from the bead. Notice again with the skew chisel, I do not put it flat on the rest and do that. I make it move. It's kicked up and it slides into the corner. Makes the whole thing look a lot neater. These are what I call the minor shapes, the beads and the coves. We're now going to move on to the major shape, the ball, the vase, and the tulip. Right, we're now on to the first shape, which is the ball. And as you can see, I've already patterned the piece of wood out into the battlement shape to save time. Now, again, we move on and put a pencil line in the center. Now, aesthetically, the ball shape is probably the most attractive of all the shapes we do. But unfortunately, the difference is, if you do a vase and it looks a little bit like a vase, it's okay. If you do a tulip shape and it looks a little bit like a tulip shape, well, it's okay. But when you do a ball, it either looks like a ball, but it looks like nothing on earth. So, although it's aesthetically the most attractive shape, it is the most difficult, because there are no options. And the tool we're going to use for that is this 1/2" spindle gouge. I'm going to do the first one completely freehand, and I'm going to show you something that you can use to improve your ball shape. You start the gouge again near the edge, and I roll the gouge off the wood again. See the way the gouge is rolling off the wood? Not trying to get the gouge all the way down to the bottom of the cut on my first effort. I am gradually rolling the gouge until it arrives at the bottom. See how the gouge rolls all the way over till it reaches there, and we've done that. Now we move on to the other side. See the way I've changed my body position over this way, and again roll the gouge off, roll the gouge off. See that the gouge starts from there, and the distance it's got to travel is the distance it takes to roll over. Once we've done the gouge work, we can look at our shape and we move on to the skew chisel now. And what we have a problem with the skew chisel, because at the top of the ball, that's normal grain. When we get so far down, it becomes end grain, and we're entering it at a sharper angle. So we've got to make the point of the skew chisel pick the cut up. And you'll see that happening. I'll stop the chisel when it happens. Onto the top there, roll it over, and there. There's the point of the chisel beginning to pick the cut up. This is vital, because if you don't, the same thing that happened with the skew chisel on the bead will happen on the ball. It will kick back off. Cutting edge, point. Let the point progress on down to the bottom. Onto the other side, cutting edge, point. And that should happen quite naturally, because as you can see, the chisel is now in that position, mostly showing black, just a tiny amount of white, a gap, small gap under that edge of the chisel. That's the start. As it moves down the ball, it rolls. Rolls, there's the point picked up. Chisel carries on, slowly rolling to that position. And we can have a look at our shape, and we're getting pretty close. Of course, at the moment, we've still got our pencil line on, which means that we're looking at two halves of a ball. What we want to do is now, with the last cuts, take the pencil line off, and now we're looking at the hole. That's not too bad. But of course, what I've done is with many years of experience. You can actually make yourself a template. And what we've done is scribe the hole, cut it in half, and then cut it out on the bandsaw. Now it won't be accurate, but there's an easy way of making it accurate. That's the size of your ball. Force it over there. It'll burn a little bit, but we're going to get rid of that in a minute, that waste wood. And there we've got a perfect shape for our ball. We don't want all that shape, so we've cut it off to the size that we want it. And that's what we're going to use. And there's that mark that we just put on burning it off. We could take that away immediately. And again, we see the action of the gouge. Now, one of the most important parts of what we're doing is the entry cut. There isn't one. Nowhere on that piece of wood can you tell where I entered the wood. That's because, as you again can see from the overhead camera, the gouge rolls into the shape. It doesn't just enter the wood and roll over. It rolls over and enters the wood. The bottom. And again. Again, watch that movement. See the movements of the gouge. Rolling all the way over from all black to virtually all white. What we've got there, we can try our template. And we've got quite a bit to take off that. All the heavy work, as you can see, is done with the spindle gouge. We don't come to using the skew chisel until the last. It's okay, we can move on to the skew chisel again now. Watch me pick the cut up. There it goes. Cutting edge, pick the cut up, and away we go. We're getting pretty close now, so we take the pencil line off. Stop the lathe for a better view with our template. And we're getting there just a little bit off the sides. And there we go. Very good. But what are the problems? And the problems that we face, we're going to show you on the third one. Because, unfortunately, because of the difficulty of making the tools cut, once we get them cutted, boy, we're going to keep them cutting. And this happens. And you can see right away that I'm pushing the gouge into the wood first, and then rolling it all the way round. Pushing the gouge in, rolling it all the way round. So every time I make a cut, I take some off the top and some off the side. And we finish up beading the ball, although what I finished up with there can only be described as a mess. But that's what happens. We keep wanting to cut all the way round the ball instead of off the corner, off the corner, off the corner, until eventually we reach there with the last cut, not the first cut. And there's not a lot we can do about that to improve it, I'm afraid, because the ball has now become too narrow. And again, just to let you see the shapes finished rather than with those flat surfaces in there, we can do our cove movement again very quickly. Just reinforces on another part of what we're doing what we've already done. And there we've completed our ball shape. And bear in mind, it is only a ball shape because it doesn't go all the way around. The next shape we're going to do is the tulip shape. As you can see, we've prepared the wood in two different lengths. That's because the tulip shape will actually lend itself to being any length, any diameter. So I'm going to show you the problems, first of all doing the short one and then doing the long one. And most of the work will be done with the spindle gouge. Again, I move over into this position, finger underneath the rest, and we're going to roll first of all the half bead. And as you can see, I'm now doing it with the gouge. I'm doing a rough outline before I improve the shape. But you must learn to roll a bead as much as possible with the skew chisel first, and then you can do it roughly with the gouge later on. Move to the back and round the back part of the shape here. Now, one of the things you have to remember to do is, again, because it's mostly a convex shape, we need to mark the high spot. So we're going to put a pencil line there, which will give me approximately, it doesn't have to be accurate, but it will give me approximately the high spot of the shape. Now we move to the hollowing part, and this time, although there is still a slight twist, it's very slight, it's mainly body. See the way I make my body push over one way to pull the gouge away from that corner a little bit quicker than if I was doing a cove. Now this is the most important part of this shape, because we're now going to roll the gouge over and follow the under shape, so that there's two different movements. It will roll over, then transfer to going under. Again, there's the rolling over part. We're rolling it over. Again, you see that I roll into the shape. Don't take nothing off the diameter. There's the change of direction. Roll, then change direction. Roll over and go under. Roll over and go under. Now we've got a rough outline of what we're trying to do. You can see that my curve at the back hasn't reached the pencil line, so we'll just stretch that out a little bit more. The distance the gouge is going to travel is the distance it takes to roll over. So there, you can step back, and by working from either side of that pencil line, you can see we're beginning to form a continuous curve here. Here, somewhere on this line, it changes direction. And what's important is that A, you cannot see the change or feel the change. It should be a very smooth changeover. Having got to that stage, we now introduce the skew chisel again to start to clean up our shape. Half bead, chisel, rolls over till it's flat on the rest. End of story. That is what you have to do. A bead is only a bead when the chisel finishes flat on the rest. To the back, pick the cut up. There's that cut now, picking the cut up as it drops down into the shape. And we can move part of the way into the hollow with the skew chisel. But don't go all the way, because it's the curve at the bottom of that is a little bit on the tight side. But I can use it to about there. It's difficult. Don't ruin your job trying to do that. Take the pencil line up to give us our continuous curve again. Blend our shapes in. You see me using my finger all the time to feel for any discrepancies in the shape. Your fingers actually will tell you an awful lot more than your eyes quite often. And just a little bit more off there. And there is our tulip shape. Now that's the short one. Now we're going to move on to the long one. And when I come to the difficult area, because the difficult area is here, I'll talk a little bit more about that. But first of all, we'll start off with the half bead. We need to start well away from where we're going to finish and move the gouge in the same way, but maybe running it a little bit longer now, because the The tulip shape is longer, so the neck of the tulip shape is longer. Don't allow a wall to develop anywhere. Take it away. Doesn't have to be the right shape, as long as you're not going to allow the gouge to foul the wall that you've built up on the other side. Now we can move down to the far end. Pencil line, probably the high spot is somewhere about there. Again, it's not vital, it's approximate. We start to roll the tulip shape with the gouge. Again, watching the movement of the gouge rolling over. Moving back towards the pencil line slowly, not starting from the pencil line, but working the cut back towards it. Now we can use the inch spindle gouge. Because it's such an old elongated curved shape, we can put the inch spindle gouge on and take away some of the heavy cuts. And as we get nearer to the pencil line, we need to emphasize this continuous curve, because at the moment we've got a flat there. Now it doesn't matter how long this is, we must have a continuous curve working from either side. Provided we leave the pencil line still on, we will not have taken any weight off the wood. All as we'll have done, this is what we're trying to do, is shape the wood. Again, see that gentle roll now, very gentle roll. Moving it back towards the pencil line all the time. You can see we're getting closer to a continuous curve. We'll take a little bit of that weight off again there. So we can keep looking at the proportions of the shape. And now we can go on to the skew chisel again. There's the point picking the cut up. It's not quite as severe. It's a more gentle curve, so we're not picking the cut up quite as early. There we go. Same on the other side. You must, and because this part of it here, there's nothing to show the curve. See the way I'm using the chisel. See the way the chisel is just gently moving upwards. If you watch the long point and the black and white of the chisel, you'll see a gentle movement like that. If I don't do that, the chisel will cut straight. And we can carry on further down. Now, because it's a long curve, I can make my skew chisel operate. If you find difficulty with this, then use the big gouge. See the changes of direction. It's only slight from the chisel moving that way to it moving that way. So it's coming over and under like that. Put a half bead in. See the point of the chisel cutting all the way around. Now we can take the pencil line off. Again, we're looking at two halves of the shape, and what we want to do is look at the whole. Okay. Again, you see, it's more body movement. I'm moving my body over this way with the handle tucked against the side of my body there, so that I take the handle with my body movement. I like to emphasize the fact that at this point, this is not a cove. It doesn't do that. It gently curves away. And that looks a pretty good shape. Again, you see the continuous curve over and under. And if you actually were to take that from there and turn it round, a little bit of a guide is that that would fit inside there. That's our tulip shape. What I'm going to do now is turn three shapes. Two are going to be right and one is going to be wrong, so that you compare them. Well, with a little bit of license, we've actually completed the turning now of all three of the tulip shapes. They're all basically the same shape, but two of them are bad shapes and one is a good shape. This is the good shape, as you will recognize from the turnings that I did a few minutes ago. But let's describe the problems with this. Look at the shape here. It's a continuous curve all the way to here. And only when it reaches here does it suddenly change direction. Our bead is not a half bead, it's a half pyramid. It just slopes down. The corner of our bead is too sharp because the hollow, we've taken it in again too sharp there. And instead of allowing the gouge to move away from the corner, we've gone in and then twisted round. So we've got a continuous curve there and only a short change of direction there. On this one, the half bead is fine. Looks like a half bead. We've come away from that corner. That's okay. But look at the length of the neck. This becomes very short and the neck becomes far too long. And so we've got to balance them out. And as I said, it's a case of approximately this area here, turning over and fitting into that area there. This is the right one. You can see we've got a nice curve, gentle change of direction, a nice half bead, and this corner being brought away into the curve at the bottom there. So all in all, that's the right shape. These are not right or wrong, they are just bad. So that's all we have to do on the tulip shape. We're now going to move on to the vase. Again, as you can see, we've prepared the timber to turn the vase shape, a small one and a large one. The vase shape is actually probably the least used of all the shapes that we do. but it has certain significant parts of it that you have to take note of, and we'll show you them as we go along. And what we're going to do now is use the gouge again and start to form the shape. We're in this position. Again, I emphasize the grip doesn't change. And we're beginning to roll the gouge off again. Slowly but surely. Again, watch that movement before the gouge rolls into the cut. Movement before the gouge rolls into the cut. See the handle of the gouge rising as I go further down, because I'm going quite a long way in. See the handle coming up, the tool's still rolling over, but the handle comes up. There's my angle. One of the things we don't talk about because we do it, that's the first angle for rubbing the bevel. As I bring the gouge up, you can now see that the bevel is being rubbed here. Although the angle of the gouge has changed, we're still rubbing the bevel. So you don't have to think all the time about rubbing the bevel, just give your gouge an angle. That's okay, we can now go on to the skew chisel. And what you notice immediately with this particular shape is there is no straight area. It doesn't go straight and then curl down. The shape is dropping away right from that corner, away down. And again, watch the chisel, that roll in action, even there, where it appears to be slightly straight, it isn't, and the chisel rolls into the bottom there. And again, picking the cut up with the point and rolling down to the bottom. There. See that? That's what you're looking for all the time. See that little movement? And on and into the shape. Now this part of the vase shape, because the vase shape is not perfectly straight, and it will usually run into a cove. Now even though we've got a very straight wall and we're going to go in a long way, the action of the gouge is no different. Nothing changes, it still twists. And you can watch that as I start off now, put it onto the wood, and don't do that. See, we all slip and twist. See the twist in action? From there, twist the gouge down, and you can see my body moving it away from the high wall as it enters the wood. There's the wall, we're running down the wall. The gouge twists and my body pulls it away so that we don't get a perfectly straight line, we get a curved line from there. And again. And just to take that little slip out. And there's our short vase shape. Now we're going to do a longer vase shape, and again you'll see that nothing actually changes. Doesn't matter how long the shape is. I'm trying to make my mind up at this moment which way to do it, and I think it'll probably be better if I do it this way. Again, you see me moving the gouge along and rolling it over, moving it along and rolling it over. Further up. If you find difficulty rolling that gouge, then use the big gouge, because it's only a gentle curve. But it is a curve. And the chisel. See how far down the wood we were before the point of the chisel picked the cut up? I think we'll change my grip a little bit because I'm running along the rest. Chisel all the time rolling over. There you saw it pick the cut up and into there. And from the overhead camera you can still see that the bevel on the skew chisel is still rubbing. Take that down and we'll put in our cove there. Now we've got to move to this end and form that shape here, which now the camera this side will give you a really clear shot of the action of the gouge. Always remember that the entry cut is the most dangerous part of what you do. That's the occasion when the gouge will occasionally, you've just seen it, do that. So it's the entry cut. And that's why I always try to tell people about the finger grip, because holding the gouge as firmly as possible is important. There you see. See the sweep of the gouge, the use of my body to sweep the gouge round and off. Don't make the wall too straight. The overhead camera will probably pick up the actual shape of what I'm doing. Just a little touch up with the skew chisel. And what we can show you with the rule, because these two surfaces are approximately the same height, you can see that there is very little area that is straight there. Our shape curves almost up to the top. So there is no straight area on the top. It doesn't matter how long the shape is. And that's the end of this section, where we've covered all the major shapes. We now move on to a section of put them all together in a composite form and talk about the visual balance of the shape. This section now, we're going to actually take all the shapes that we've used and put them all together and talk about the balance of the shape. Because like I said at the beginning, we don't just start there and finish there and whatever comes out in between. It's all, if you like, composed, and we balance it all out to make it look right. So we're going to start off with the spindle gouge, and we're actually going to go through all the shapes. One of the things that I learned at a very early age is that I always wanted to get each individual shape right before I moved on to the next one. And that's not the way to do it. You actually put all your shapes in first and then refine them. And that's what we're going to do first with the spindle gouge. So we're going to start off, and I'll tell you each shape as I come to it. The first one is what I call a D shape. Why is it a D shape? Well, when you come off a square, you can't roll the bead back. You can only soften it. And from my position, it looks like the letter D. It's as simple as that. We put that in. Then we're going to put a ball in. In between, you'll see that we're leaving a space for the cove. And we're keeping that cove nice and tight, just in case we have to take something off the ball. The cove is too wide and we have to take something off the ball, the cove becomes a neck. So it gives us a little bit of room to play with. Just put the shape in rough, then we're putting another bead. See, now I'm using the gouge to roll the bead. The action is exactly the same as the skew chisel, but I'm only using it as a rough, to form a rough outline. Then a cove. Now the tulip shape. Because I'm getting a little bit close to the end of my rest, we'll move that along. In goes a cove. Whoops, there's that little slip again. I have to get hold of Mr. Editor and make sure that that doesn't go in. And we're going to put a bead again next to that. But I want to drop the shape in further. And what I can't do is try to drop the bead in. A bead, like we've said before, is only a bead when the chisel is rolled over. So because I want to go lower down, further into the wood, because we've got to put a vase shape in, I'm going to use a shape called an OG, under and over. Remember going back to the roughing out and we put an OG on the square? Well, there we put an OG there to take the shape further in. Put our cove in again. Having a little bit of problem with my centre column there. Move it along. And in goes the vase shape. Again, watch that entry cut. That's the one that causes all the trouble. Now, if I did actually want to take a bead lower down, what I would do is take the whole of the shape down, then put the bead in. Our cove, and finish off with our bead at the end. And there, in a very rough outline, is all the shapes that we want to do. And if the camera now can move in a little bit closer, we're going all the way back to the beginning to start to refine the shape. And for this, we've brought in the skew chisel. We use the skew chisel just to roll the D shape back just a little. And here, we put the point of the chisel on and roll our bead the other way. The chisel rolls over, finishes flat, and in goes the first fillet. The little flat surfaces are called fillets. The bead has told me that's where the first fillet goes. We move on to the ball. Now, because we want to see the ball shape as a ball shape, that has to go further into the wood. So we take that shape further in. See that I've made an angle cut across there, because in between there we put the cove. That's a little bit tight. Like I said, it's taking the amount off the ball that will allow us to open up the cove. Fill in that side. Take our fillet down, approximately the same height. In goes our bead here, roll, in goes the fillet. The other side, roll, in goes the fillet. Again, check out to see them that they're the same level. Now we can put our cove in a little bit better. And even on that first shape, you can now see how I'm beginning to balance it out. Now I'm beginning to make it look right. It may not be right yet. That doesn't matter. On to our next cove. Now the back of a tulip is very similar to the shape of the ball. So again, in goes the fillet, much lower than the bead fillet. Move further along. Our half bead again here. Chisel rolling over, finishing flat on the lathe, on the rest. In goes the fillet. See the body pushing the gouge over, pulling it away from the corner. Again, using that over and under with the gouge to form the tulip shape, taking nothing off the diameter. Come on to the next bead, again the same, in goes the fillet. Because we've already roughly turned the bead in to start with, we can use just one cut, one rolling action of the skew chisel. Keep watching for all the movements I described earlier in the video. Under and over. Take the two fillets down level there again. Doesn't matter how small the cove is or how big it is. The action of the gouge is exactly the same. Nothing changes. In goes our bar shape now. See the action of the skew chisel, that gentle roll as it moves further down the shape. And we go in with our bead now cut in at a lower place. Doesn't matter whether we take it in further, it doesn't matter how low we take it in, as long as we retain the shape of the bead. If you try to drop it in too far, then you will lose the shape of the bead. Open up the cove. So remember that entry cut with the gouge is again always the most dangerous. On our final bead shape, in goes the fillet. Strangely enough, the top bead is always rounded all the way over. Because we've got two different heights on the beads, so the fillets are set at two different heights. So take little looks at it. Now we're going back and starting again to have a look over the overall appearance of the shape, see where we can improve. It doesn't matter how many times you go over the shape. You are first of all composing the shape and then refining the shape. And that's what we're doing now. We're just giving them a few last refining cuts, making sure where a curve shape meets a fillet, it's nice and sharp. One shape doesn't undercut the other. There's no hurry with this. Take it nice and steady. Check it out. Got a little, every time you see something that shouldn't be there, check it out. Even out the widths of your fillets. Check out the heights, that's okay. Also notice, as I bring the chisel round, a slight undercut on the fillet occurs. Again, the chisel is kicked up to put that fillet in. Do not present it like that. It still has to be kicked up and slid into the corner. up our shape there. It's okay. And one of the things the beginner has a problem with is he wants to get the shape right the first time. Why? Because he doesn't want to go over it. And the reason for that is he hasn't got the confidence with the tools. You have to practice and practice until you gain the confidence with the tools to then refine your shape over and over until you're happy with it. And that's what I'm doing now. See the angle of the gouge and the body movement, the twist. Clean up the back of our vase shape. And we're just about coming to the end. Shape looks pretty good. Even though my gouge in there is very tight, the action doesn't change. We've got a very small cove there. You can see the way my body is helping and the twist in action. And again, take a quick look over. And we've put all these shapes together in a collective form, and I've explained about each one how the shape balances out. Over comes our bead, fillet goes in. Ball, fillet lower. You can see if you take that section there, the balance, the way the shape balances out. Same here. These two fillets the same height, them two fillets the same height, but the one at the back lower. These are what make the shapes balance. These fillets are vitally important pieces of your turning. Again, we brought these two fillets down together and we've dropped them in with an OG. We did not try to turn the bead further and further into the wood. Our vase shape, a nice curved, basically a curved taper you could call it. Cove, our smaller diameter bead, we wanted to take it further down, so we took it, made it smaller, and back out to our full diameter bead. Check all your coves, that they are coves and not diablos or cotton reels, and I'm reasonably pleased with that shape. And that's the end of this section of putting all the shapes together in a composite form. This section is all about repetition. Many enthusiasts say to me, I can turn the first one, but how do I do the second, third and fourth? Well, we're going to here give you some information about how to do that. And I'm going to mount the piece of wood in the normal way that I do it when I'm working. You've seen me cut the ends and mount the piece of wood that way with a cross. Well, normally what I would do is put it in like that, use my thumb to find out whether it's in the middle. Little tap, That's okay. Down the other end. If it touches all four corners of the wood, then the piece of wood is in the middle. There we go. Touched all four. My thumb touches all four corners. Now you probably wondered most of the time what the hammer was really for. Well, it is only a tack hammer. I normally do that with the piece of wood to drive it onto the centre. A lot of people say to me, oh, damage the bearing. Well, in 40 odd years I have replaced exactly 4 or 5 sets of bearings. So it doesn't do too much damage to them. But we all have our own way of putting the piece of wood in. And whichever way you want to do it, that's fine. Here we have our first one. We've already done it. So now we need to set our piece of wood out. So we mark where the square's going. There. Check everything's up. And you may notice or may not notice my deliberate mistake. I'm going to remove the piece of wood because I forgot to slow the lathe down with the larger piece of wood in. And we can retain. That's fine. That shows you that even people like me sometimes forget. Now we can bring the speed up. Speed comes up until the lathe maybe starts to vibrate, and then we take it back. But that's fine. That's okay. And we go back to where we started with the roughing out. We roll the gouge into the wood, well away from the corner. Create the gap. And take our inch spindle gouge to rough out. Now some of you may wonder why I'm not using a standard roughing out gouge. Well, it's like a return to the past for me. I started off my career using an inch spindle gouge, and then about 10 years ago they stopped making them, and so I had to revert to a roughing out gouge. Well, Ashley Isles now make this larger spindle gouge, and I've started to use it again, and I refer to it as user friendly. The reason being, there are no high sides. It's a much flatter gouge. Less danger areas. And we've roughed our piece of wood out. If we're doing 4 legs, then we rough all 4 of them out before we move our rest in closer. Take our pattern, and start to mark out where all the shapes are. That point. And we need a pair of calipers now, and we're going to measure this part here because that's the largest of the small diameters of the piece. So we know full well that we can take that down to that size. Before we start. That, and then at this part we form our battlement shape. Now if you find it's a bit difficult to get in there with the skew chisel, we could change over and get in there with the spindle gouge a little bit quicker. Now they are the shoulders of our fillets. So we take a measurement of the fillet there. It's okay. And measure the small one. And the same on the other side. Okay. This is that one. Don't be impatient with your calipers. Take it nice and steady. And there. Set the calipers for there. And again, cut away all the waste wood. Whoops. And there we have our battlement shape. And we would do this on all of the other three legs, ready to start to turn the shape. We've put everything in place, we've got sizes. All we have to worry about now is actually turning the shape. And we're going to do that right away. Our D shape there, you see it coming off a square. Deliberate mistake, no pencil line on the high spots. There we go. Our ball shape. See that run and roll? Run and roll. Enter the wood on the roll. This is part of the tulip shape. Not all of it. The hollow runs straight off. But it's still part of the tulip shape. What we need to do there is take the caliper size, the bottom of the foot, and over and under. Over, over, and under. Check the size out. Over. That's it. That's okay. Run our taper in. Now a taper has all peculiar things about it, because what I find when people are running a taper in, they get all right to that point and then they do something like that, and if you see, the taper comes down nicely, gets to there, and it goes zoom, suddenly drops in, and they leave it like that. The idea is to take that wood away from there. You're not going to be able to get the gouge right up against the tulip shape. We'll do that with the skew chisel in a few minutes. In goes our coves. Again, take your calipers. Oh, isn't that a surprise? And just a touch more off there. Right. And again, we start and go back and start to tidy the shape up. I'm pulling the rest out a little bit because I noticed that I've still left a little tiny bit of my pencil line. That's okay, because I need to clean up this edge. There. Always very difficult to use a skew chisel close to a corner. What I tend to do is just roll the chisel up like that and then pick the cut up there with the point. In goes my fillet. Take my pencil line off. See the chisel picking the cut up again? Okay. Tidy my fillets up. Now when we skew down a taper, we have to remember that if we start the chisel at that angle and keep it at that angle, we finish up going over the top. We have to raise the handle slightly as we run down the taper. And again, this means we hold the chisel in the same cutting position. Check out it's nice and smooth. Pencil line off our tulip shape in, bring the two corners together. Now you don't have to be able to do this with a skew chisel. The gouge is okay, but it's all about learning to use the tools. Takes a little bit of time, but don't worry. And we can check, see how we're getting on. I think that's okay. And then we've gone through our repetition. It is a very disciplined thing to do, and you have to go through the sections in exactly the way that I've described. If you do that, you have more chance of repeating the same shape. Now, this is the end of our section on repetition. The next one is on the sanding. And we shall go through how we go about sanding the job. Now we come to the final section, sanding. And most enthusiasts seem to think that sanding is very easy. But the sandpaper is a cutting tool, exactly the same as the chisels, and must be used correctly. And this is what I'm going to show you now. A piece of sandpaper is about 4 inches square, folded over. And I'm allowing my fingers to follow the shapes, making sure that none of the sandpaper sands parts that I don't want it to sand. Moving to a corner, not through a corner. Sanding the shape I've turned, not sanding it into shape. Making sure we do not lose any of the sharp edges. Now normally my sanding would consist of 150, 180 and 240 grit sandpaper. Because I'm only using one grit this time to show you, we're using 240. And as you can see, by me putting my fingers directly behind the sandpaper and rotating them round the shape, the amount of pressure that I can exert brings off quite a considerable amount of dust. Now, of course, we're coming to the next shape, and I'm going to sand badly to show you the difference. I got people who sand like this. They have no control over the sandpaper. Start doing things like this where they can't actually see the wood that they're sanding, so they don't know what is going on. Instead of sanding at the back. But of course, things you can spot right away is our cove is rounded over there, and although that's still quite square on the top, see the rounded area, look at the half bead point. It looks awful. because I've not kept the sandpaper under control. I've just let it do exactly what it wants to do. And you can see the difference between the sharp profile and the rounded profile there. So we'll carry on now sanding correctly. All the time sanding from the back of the lathe so that you can see exactly what you're sanding. For this particular part, we're using a handheld camera so that you can get a really good view of what's going on. As you can see, I'm keeping all the corners sharp. Don't go over the shapes just once, I go back. And when I decide that I may have completed the sanding with this particular grit, the first thing I do is I stop the lathe and I check that it's all clean. Carefully. It's not just a cursory look. You've got to examine all parts of the wood. And if there's anywhere we're not happy with, we do it again. There's the bad part. See the difference in my sanding techniques? And back onto the rest. And again, checking out everything. And as I said, I'm only using one grit to sand this, and it was 240. But you can see the mess that I've made there, and how clean and crisp the rest of it is. All the elements in this video have been carried out with just 3 turning tools, and they are the inch spindle gouge, the half-inch spindle gouge, and the 3/8 skew chisel, all made by Ashley Isles and will in future be known as the Ray Jones Spindle Turning Collection. I hope this video has given you an insight into spindle turning, not the artistic side, but one which will allow you to make many beautiful and practical things. Goodbye.